Okay, Brad, yesterday we went to Great America and I finally did the thing I've been meaning to do for a long time.
Took a bath in cotton candy.
There was a little bit of cotton candy and there were churros consumed.
Good.
They were dipped in goo.
What kind of goo? Hang on.
Strawberry today.
Okay.
Sometimes it's Bavarian cream. Sometimes it's strawberry. Right now, because it's Peanuts Festival for some reason, they have a red velvet / sour cream cheese icing churro that they make, but only apparently on weekday food at the park, not anywhere near as wild as weekend food at the park. We learned. Yeah.
Well, look, I'll take whatever goo I can get. Anyway.
So for people who don't know, Great America is it's like a theme park. It's down south towards San Jose on the bay side of the peninsula. And it's like, I don't want to call it small because it has some like absolute banger roller coasters, but it's like the small theme park. It's like the roller coasters are mostly fairly short. Their intensity and excitement levels may be high, but it's like if you were playing Roller Coaster Tycoon, it's like how much stuff can you pack into this 20-acre area? Not we're in Ohio and land is cheap and free, so we're going to expand out as big as we can get.
It's your classic regional park.
Yeah, it's a good one of those. And it's been around for a long time. It's like tickets are cheap. It's a fun thing to do on like a weekday. It was the last day of spring break, so we went down. And often when we go in the evenings or on like the holiday days, and not all the rides are open, including it's worth mentioning, it's right next door to EA's Redwood Shores offices too.
Mm-hmm.
So
I know where that is.
Yeah. One of the things that they have there is the Mass Effect ride.
Okay.
Which has been there for, I assume, a fairly long time now. It's like a 4D, 5D theater thing where like you put on the glasses and you sit down and there's chairs that like shake and move and rattle, and the screen's pretty good size. It's not like IMAX big, but it's like 60 or 70 feet. It's pretty big. And the kids yesterday, I've never pushed them to go because like my kid's young enough and her friends are young enough that they don't know what Mass Effect is.
It's been a minute and a half since Mass Effect has been what I would describe as relevant. But anyway.
Yeah, like I was like, hey, this is a video game. She's like, what kind of video game? I was like, because it's an Xbox 360 video game. She was like, was that the last one? I was like, no, it's the one before that one. She's like, oh, unimpressed. Mm-hmm. So, but today they were like, hey, let's go ride the Mass Effect ride. That would be fun. And I was like, okay, we can go, because we were walking by and they were letting people in, so we could just walk right on. We walk in, we get in the theater. The seats are pretty. It's like big. When we talked about Great America last time, I got multiple questions from people that were like, hey, did you ride the Mass Effect thing? It's supposed to be pretty cool. So you go into this big theater. There's like big super D-box chairs where like they're clearly like going to rock and rattle and move around like crazy. There's underneath in front of all the seats, there's like the thing that you used to step on to go into the supermarket door that would open the automatic door for you. So I assume if somebody like falls out of their chair, then it stops moving the seats so they don't get crushed. It has little puffers that blast air on the backs of your legs and like the back of your neck, and it has like full on actuators in the seat that like pound you in the back like a massage chair almost.
All right, I like a good neck puffer. This sounds good.
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't like getting their neck puffed? So there's also a guy who's standing at the front of the auditorium in like a Mass Effect costume, not armor, but like a civilian on the Citadel.
Little jumpsuit.
Yeah, like a jumpsuity kind of vibe. He's a little bit of a jacket on. He's wearing glasses. He has a headset mic that looks like a normal ass headset mic that they maybe put a little bit something glows on, so it looks a little science fiction-y. And he's there to get you hyped up about the universe of Mass Effect.
And how hyped did you get?
Look.
Was he into it?
He was working hard.
Okay.
And it was the most unfriendly crowd I've ever seen, because he was like, we're getting on our spaceship. It's a decommissioned blah 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 class, just like Commander Shepard. Pause for cheers. No reaction from the audience.
Wow.
Like, I would guess, if I had to make a guess, I would say I was the only person in the theater of 45 or 50 people that was aware of Mass Effect as a franchise.
And you were screaming your head off.
No, I was just like, I was looking around to see if anybody else was reacting at all.
Man, that's rough.
So, but it did not deter him. So he's standing there. He has like consoles. He's like handles to pull and buttons to press. And he's like, we're going to use the mass relay system, because the whole story is, spoilers, I guess, for this 10, 15-year-old theme park ride that's only in California. You're getting on a ship and you're going to go to a resort planet through the mass relay at Sharon, the one that you use at the start of the game. And then you're going to, like, just as you get there, there's an invasion happening. The bad invasion is happening and things are going to hell. It seems like Mass Effect 3 timing.
Okay. Are they Reapers or the Geth?
I think they were Reapers. It was the big tripod guys.
Yes.
Those seem like Reapers, right?
Space cuttlefish.
Yeah, kind of.
Yes.
So we're doing the whole thing and we fly around and the Normandy zoops out in front of you. You get there's like an EV lady up there that's telling you what's going on. Everything, of course, is super 3D because you have your glasses on. He shouts out the Normandy. He shouts out the Citadel. He's trying real hard. Like side characters come in and pop up on our radio HUD as like the ship is the flight's going bad. And the whole time, no reaction from anybody in the room about it's always the pause, no reaction.
That's harsh, consistently. Man.
Like usually people are primed to be excited about stuff at theme parks, right? Like you're hopped up on junk food. You've been riding exciting rides all day. Like it's hot, sweaty. You're suddenly in a cool air conditioned room and like just dead stares every time. But like to his credit, he did the pause every time. Right. He had a whole bit about how he had to wear glasses because he stared at the sun without his special protective glasses on.
Topical.
Yeah. And like he was going for it and just no love from anyone. I'm going to say fell flatter than Mass Effect Andromeda.
Ouch. That was both too low and too soon.
So anyway, Mass Effect ride. I'm going to give it a skip. Probably. I'd rent that one. Maybe.
Were there any? I have to know. Were there any my favorite blank on the Citadel jokes?
100%. He does say he 100% had it's Commander Shepard's favorite blah 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 on Terra Nova.
Great.
He shouted out the Citadel. He shouted out not Grunt. What was the first Krogan?
Oh, Rex.
Rex. Rex shows up.
Shepard.
Yeah. What's his name? The short-lived guy, the scientist guy doesn't show up. The genocider.
Oh, Morden
doesn't show up.
Oh, well, he's gone.
But yeah, it was I'm glad we did it. The kids were completely underwhelmed and like I was like, "Hey, did you enjoy that?" They were like, "No, there were scary monsters on the screen all the time." And also they didn't like getting punched in the back by the seats. The seats, they expect the seats to be a passive part of the ride and not an active part of the ride. Mm-hmm. And they were like, the guy kept waiting for like reactions from the audience. Like they picked up on the guy dying slowly 30 times a day as he pitched this to the audience. So I'm going to say if you want to ride the Mass Effect ride at California's Great America, probably you should go soon.
It's a ride whose days are numbered.
Yeah, it's not long for the world. The Reapers are coming. Welcome to Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. I'm Will.
I'm Brad. Hello.
Hi, hello. So after I got back from New Terra, we went and rode Flight Deck, which used to be the Top Gun roller coaster. Oh. It's a hanging coaster, so your feet dangle and you like go the outside of the loop. Mm. That was pretty good. It washed the bad Mass Effect taste out of both their mouths.
That's good. Speaking of regional theme parks, I watched a documentary on the plane out here.
Ooh.
Called Closed for Storm.
Oh.
About a regional theme park in the greater New Orleans area called Jazzland.
Oh, that sounds extremely regional.
It has been abandoned since 2005.
Wow.
Like abandoned, gone to seed, just like sitting there.
Was this a Defunct Land thing?
No, it's just a documentary made by some filmmaker. I don't know. Didn't seem to be affiliated with anything, but I felt kind of like an idiot. It was 20 plus, maybe 30 minutes into the movie before I realized why it has been abandoned since 2005.
Well, it was Hugo, right? Or
do you remember something? Do you remember a little weather event called Hurricane Katrina?
Yeah, it was when we flooded all of New Orleans. Yes. And millions of people had to evacuate. And people were fighting alligators and stuff.
A lot of people died and lost their homes and all kinds of other awful stuff. It was real bad. Well, the park was another casualty of that storm and the levees breaking, all that stuff. Anyway, The documentary is okay. It's a little slow and uneven. I think it could have been tightened up in places, but it's still kind of interesting. And they do a lot of urban exploring of what's left of the park, which has been sitting, like I said, for the better part of 20 years now.
Sounds like a real good video game setting.
Yeah, sure. Maybe like a Left 4 Dead campaign or something in an abandoned theme park.
Did you ever go to Carowinds when you were a kid?
Yes, Carowinds was the place. Oh, it was like 2 hours away.
It was a longer drive for us, but we went to Carowinds a couple times when I was a kid.
Was that still the closest park for you, even in Tennessee?
No, the one at with Tweetsie Railroad at the Mile High on the one on 40 between Knoxville and Asheville.
Okay,
I can't remember what that one's called.
It feels like Tennessee has more parks because you've also got Dollywood.
Yeah, Dollywood was 2 hours away for us, but it was Silver Dollar City when I was a kid still.
Okay.
Which was they didn't like once it became Dollywood, they put more roller coasters and like log flumes and stuff in. When I was a kid, it was just like a log flume and a kind of shitty roller coaster.
Can't have enough log flumes.
Look,
that's my stance.
My favorites are those ones that's like a giant inner tube with like 5 chairs in that you strap in. You're all spinning around like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Those are great.
That's a good time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't have a frame of reference because, like I said, we didn't go to other parks, but Carowinds was absolutely the thing as far as going to theme parks for us.
Yeah, I think we only went when I was really, really little, and I don't remember a whole lot of it. But yeah, the East Coast theme park and the West Coast theme park, a little bit different, I'm going to say.
Yeah, sure.
Food's still bad everywhere.
But like a lot of other things between the two coasts.
Yeah, I think it's Tweetsie Railroad is the thing I was thinking about.
Yeah, I like saw commercials and heard that name a ton when I was a kid, but we never went.
I think that's the place that they had a roller coaster like break off of the rail. Maybe that was at Carowinds actually. Somebody recently had a roller coaster, like a kind of scary roller coaster, break loose, and nobody was killed, and they caught it before it became a problem. But like, yeah,
I used to, as a kid, I would go on any thrill-seeking kind of ride. I'm not so sure I would do that at this point.
You look at the number of people that ride those rides and the number of injuries that they have, and you're, as a general rule, you're pretty safe.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. Statistics.
Yeah, like the math is good there.
Statistics only mean so much, though, when you draw the short straw.
I mean, look, I operate by Final Destination rules, man. If it's my time, the Reaper is going to get me regardless. It's just how hilarious will it be when it comes?
Yes,
I put it off.
Yes, indeed.
Speaking of the Reaper coming this week, we're talking about the xz-utils backdoor.
Yes, the open source world was rocked recently.
Yes,
I think it's fair to say by the insertion of a backdoor into a very common. I mean, very common doesn't begin to describe it.
Super
like this is
ubiquitous.
This is beyond ubiquitous. It is in literally everything.
Yeah, like the head unit in your car very likely has this piece of software in it. Yeah. Not the affected one, just to be clear.
Yes. To maybe to put it in, I mean, this is kind of analogous to like it's not a great analogy, but WinZip or the zip format in Windows. It's just another type of compression. It happens to be a type of compression that's used more on the back end in various open source contexts. Although actually, to put it in even more context, the same compression routine that XZ uses is also used in the 7-zip format. And I'm sure plenty of people listening to this have used 7-zip before. That is not to say that 7-zip is affected in any way here. That's not at all the case. I'm just trying to paint a picture of how common this underlying technology is that has been attacked.
Yeah. So just to lead with the important stuff, it's only in very early, very new, very current versions of the xz-utils package.
Yeah.
So if you're running Linux, if you're not running one of the unstable development branches, you're probably fine. And updating very regularly. I don't say this to be flip at all, but if you have to ask if you're affected by this, you are almost certainly not affected by this. Like you would know, like you would be so deep into bleeding edge open source software that you would already know basically that you're at risk of this thing. And it's like barely been used in practice as far as we know, because it was discovered quite quickly after it was fully inserted. So yeah. So yeah, there's that. It's specifically the 5.6.0 and 5.6.1 versions of xz-utils. It provides lossless compression that's analogous to gzip and zip. It's not like a lossy compression. It's not for images, stuff like that. It's mostly used to like distribute packages on Linux in a compressed format, stuff like that.
Yeah.
they hadn't made it into the mainline distros yet. So like Brad said, you would know if you have this problem. We don't really know what it did, what it was supposed to do. We know that it gave access once it was fully activated on affected systems. It would have potentially given attackers access to the SSHD process if it was running in the right folder, and it gives them the ability to bypass normal authentication on the machine so that people could remotely execute code.
Yeah.
Which, just to be clear, that's bad.
That's extremely bad. Can I just stop for a second and reflect on the incredibly clandestine nature of this whole thing? Like the fact that you can sit there and say, we don't know exactly what this thing does. Like people are investigating and figuring it out. But as of right now, we don't know the entire scope of like the attack surface or like what it was capable of. We don't know if there are other types of backdoors that this malicious attacker or other, there could be other exploits elsewhere that have been undiscovered as of right now. There might be other instances of this happening perpetrated by entirely different attackers that also have not been discovered yet. Like probably not, but maybe.
It's a threat surface that I think security people have been aware of and have considered, but haven't really, since nobody's exploited it prior to this that we're aware of it. I think people haven't treated it as a serious threat because it's a fairly involved, and as always is the case, it's like technical stuff and social engineering stuff all working together. So it's really interesting to kind of unpack what it does. The other, to your point though, that we don't really know what it did. Once you get to the point that you can remotely execute code on a machine, it kind of doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yes. You've already got full access.
Yeah. You essentially have full access to the machine. You just wget or whatever software you want, run that, and then you can do whatever you want with somebody else's machine, whether that's install a keylogger or join a giant botnet or make the centrifuges spin in such a way that they'll permanently damage themselves. Right.
Yeah. Or covertly like dump all data that machine has access to, like some giant database of sensitive information. Like the sky is probably the limit as long as you don't get caught by something like increased CPU overhead or latency or network activity or something, which we'll get to in terms of how this was discovered. But
yeah, but it could, presumably being able to remotely execute code opens up the entire realm from ransomware to destroying hardware to like everything is possible at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll get into what sort of slice of the computing world this was targeting, because they went after like probably the most high value one they could have if they had to pick one.
Yeah. So the good news, though, is that we found a Microsoft employee who works on Postgres, the SQL, their SQL server, discovered it. And like the reaction was pretty good, I think, from the community and from the developers and from the distros and from the US government and everybody involved. But what would have happened if it hadn't been found while it was still in this kind of early development distros, the development testing distros, when it had made it over to like a mainline or a long-term support version of, say, Debian and Fedora, Red Hat, and all that stuff?
Yeah, that was absolutely the intention here, was to slip it in. I mean, that's how you have to do it, because only bleeding edge distros are going to be pulling in bleeding edge software. You're going to have to wait potentially years for this to trickle down to the much more widely used stuff. So that's why they went after what they did.
So before we get further into what this is and how people found it and all the kind of downstream repercussions of this, I think it's worth explaining for people who don't know, like, what SSH is, for example.
Sure. SSH stands for Secure Shell. It is a much more modern and, as the name implies, secure version of Telnet. If you remember that from way back in the day, Telnet and then Secure Shell are just ways to remote into a server or some machine not at your location and get a command line there, get a command line session where you can run software at the command line as if you were sitting at that machine. With
elevated privileges that let you install software and do all sorts of other stuff as well, right?
Yeah, if you've got the right credentials to log in as some kind of super user remotely, then you can do the exact same things you could as if you were on that machine. And so SSH, the server that runs remotely that you console into or session into, that is the point of ingress of this backdoor. Like that's the thing that is actually compromised ultimately, that lets you or lets attackers, or would have let attackers, use this backdoor. But it's not SSH that was compromised. It's kind of, if you don't really understand how software is kind of put together hierarchically, especially in the open source world, it might be hard to conceptualize. But SSH is the thing people would have backdoored through in terms of network connectivity, but it's not the software that was compromised
that gave them access.
Right,
This xz-utils package is what gave people access. It just affected SSH on the affected systems.
Right. And that's because software is linked together. Libraries are linked together. Like software that's what dependencies are. That's the classic XKCD thing with the Jenga stack. Like the dependencies are the little bricks at the bottom, which are the component software that other programs like SSH might rely on in different contexts.
So for example, in the Windows world, we have similar ideas because often you have to install like Visual C runtimes or something like that to make an application work. But additionally, if you want to use curl functionality in a Windows program, and it's a full installed desktop Windows program, you probably just embed curl in your executable program that you have built there. On Linux, instead of doing that, you actually just say, hey, before this is all the way installed, you have to have curl on this machine. And then your application just reaches out to curl when it needs to do curl stuff. And you don't have to have separate versions. You don't have to have a version of curl embedded in the application. It's one of the reasons why often Linux applications are really, really tiny compared to, say, a giant Windows application.
Right.
And there's pros and cons to each solution. And we'll talk more about this in a little bit. But it's important to understand that, like, if you use xzip on your application on Linux, you probably don't package up a branch of xzip inside your distributable file. You're probably just saying, hey, make sure that you're telling the OS, hey, make sure xzip is installed so that I can run, because I need that to work.
Yes.
Okay. So what happens here if this programmer didn't discover this problem?
Yeah.
Like if 2 years down the line, some bad actor has low level access to millions or billions of Linux and potentially like Mac OS and iOS and even maybe Windows in some cases machines, like what does that mean?
It means a lot of really bad things for the computer security world. Where they started, though, I think we should talk about where they started, because like practically every computer on the planet probably has some amount of XC code in it. With maybe the exception of some Windows, but it's like we said, it's everywhere in the Unix world. But as of now, as far as we know, and there are going to be a lot of as far as we knows in this episode, because this is all based on like what has been uncovered in the last like 2 weeks since this was found.
3 now, yeah.
Or 3. So far as we know right now, the actual backdoor could only actually be activated on a subset of a subset of a subset of Linux machines out there. So what I mean is, like, Mac OS has XC code in it, FreeBSD, like all the Unix likes out there, absolutely. Windows probably as well. It's everywhere. But it wouldn't work on, for example, Mac OS, because Mac OS lacked the other components they used in this kind of chained attack.
Yeah.
So like malicious code was in that library. And again, it probably this bleeding edge version never actually got installed in Mac OS. No, I take that back. It was on my laptop. Homebrew, which Homebrew is the most common package manager for Mac OS, absolutely had rolled out.
Oh, XZ.
Yes.
Wow.
5.6.0 version of XZ. Went and updated that quickly. But the malicious code was in that version, for example, in Mac OS, but it was inert. It wouldn't actually do anything.
It needed the other part to connect to, right?
So in short, and I might be leaving a couple pieces out here, but in short, the environment where this actually would have been able to be activated is limited to Linux distros, Debian, and Fedora, basically. Fedora is part of Red Hat. Fedora is kind of like the upstream version of Red Hat. Like, if you've heard of Red Hat, it's huge in the enterprise world.
Yeah.
Debian is like the root of the probably the most common popular group of community-based distros in the Linux world. So like they basically went to, like, if you would envision Jenga towers of Linux distros, they went right to the bottom of, like, it's probably the 2 most common ones, right?
Yeah, or if your Linux world is a tree, then as a forest, and each main distro branch is a tree.
Yes,
this is the root of the 2 biggest trees.
So I went and pulled a list on a Distro Watch, which is a very fun, very old-fashioned site. They list 127 Linux distros that are derived from Debian, just to put it in perspective. And one of those is Ubuntu.
Yeah.
Which is certainly one of the most popular distros out there, but also MX, Linux Mint, Pop OS, Elementary OS. Like, those are all like big, widely used Linux distros that are all based on Debian. And then, like I said, what happens in Fedora trickles down to Red Hat, which is used by tremendous numbers of corporations, academic institutions, like
cloud services run on Red Hat. And
entities that can afford big Red Hat service contracts are going to be using Red Hat. And there are Red Hat rebuilds because of the way the licensing works. You can take all of Red Hat's code and rebuild it, which a couple of distros do. So you're using Red Hat without Red Hat's corporate support, right? But those are also very widely used in a lot of server contexts. So long story short, they picked the two distros that are going to encompass, like, I couldn't even tell you how much of the Linux world. Like, there are other distros out there like Arch that are unaffected by this. But especially in like server contexts, they picked, you know, like a massive attack surface by targeting these two distros.
It's a really small, it's a big initial snowball that makes an even bigger avalanche, I think is the way to look at it.
Yeah. And so the way these really buttoned up Linux distros work is that they do a lot of development in kind of like unstable versions that are not really meant for end users or servers, especially. But down the line, as the packages get tested and, you know, bugs are fixed and whatever, they declare like, okay, this version of this distro is now ready to go out wide as like a stable release. So the ultimate intent was for this backdoor to make it into these stable releases that then would be used on like every server on the planet practically. You know what I mean? So if this had gotten out there and been undiscovered for years, like the damage would have been incalculable. Like, who knows what this could have been used for.
So just so that people have an idea of what the timeline is here, there's more stuff that happened before what we're talking, but the first hidden backdoor binary merge happened on the 23rd of this year, 23rd of February of this year.
And that was, to be clear, that was the first point at which this could actually be used, right? Because I think this malicious actor had been laying the groundwork for this for some time, but my understanding is that the final piece was only put in place around then.
This is the first code. Yeah, this is the first code. The discovery by the Microsoft researcher was on March 27th or 29th. Yeah, March 28th, he discovers the bug, privately notifies Debian and the distros at OpenWall mailing list, and Red Hat assigns a ticket and the whole thing.
Yeah, it got a CVE, the CISA, the government agency.
Yeah,
got out there immediately talking about it.
The backdoor warning gets posted on the 29th of March. So it's been in the world for a month. It's posted about on the 28th and 29th, and everything from that point on, like Debian immediately rolled it back to rolled the affected thing back to 5.4.5.1, which was the last unaffected version. And like it becomes not an issue at that point because people are aware of it. Word gets out incredibly fast, yada yada.
Yeah.
Should we talk about like the discovery, because it's kind of interesting how the discovery happened?
Yes, it was Anders Freund, I guess, is the name of the engineer at Microsoft who works on Postgres, which is database software. I've kind of got a bone to pick with the way that some people have talked about this. Not really people who are like in the know in the computing world, but I feel like more like people who were just sort of like peanut gallery chiming in on Twitter. Well, a lot of people. Well, sorry, let me back up. The way he found this was doing some benchmarking, some routine benchmarking, and noticed that SSH logins were taking a long time on his test machine, which was running the unstable development version of Debian.
It was like he noticed a lot of CPU utilization on the SSHD, which is the SSH server test, the daemon,
right? Which
usually is really low CPU utilization,
right? So he saw higher CPU usage and higher latency on these logins, and like I saw some people out there just going like, people who are sort of like exoticizing this guy. Is that a word? Kind of going like, oh, this is the internet's final boss. He's the silverback gorilla. He cared about 500 milliseconds of latency, and now the world has been saved. Like 500 milliseconds of latency is a long time in enterprise contexts, in server operations, like in heavy computing. Like any amount of latency that shouldn't be there it bears investigation. You know, like it's not like this guy was like so obsessive that, you know, it's not some like Independence Day situation, right? Where he's the mad scientist who saved the world because he cared about something no person in their right mind would ever care about. Like this, as far as I know, is like pretty routine thing to look at.
Yeah, I mean it's just normal bug fixing and like looking for, hey, here's I'm having a problem with something else and happened to notice something else that was weird at the same time.
Yeah,
it's the same as when you are like, hey, my game is running slow, and then you realize that your SSD is running on PCIe 2.0 speeds instead of PCIe 4.0 speeds, right? So on the 29th of February, the assumption is that this attack was accelerated because of some changes that were happening to this libsystemd that would have probably defeated the attack. So that's possible. It's possible that's why everything went fast, and why there were some bugs and stuff that caused like the systemd CPU utilization to go up and all that. The reaction was, I think, pretty good from everybody. The person who maintains this actual package, it was on vacation. Lassie Collin is the person's name.
Yeah, who was also the creator of the XZ format. It should be made clear. LZMA is the compression routine that XZ uses, but like I said, 7-zip also uses that. Like XZ is not the only format to use that type of compression, but he created the XZ format and is its sole maintainer. Like,
yeah, and has been since like 2008.
Right, like it is the classic example of that XKCD comic of literally one person maintaining incredibly fundamental, important infrastructure without any help or pay
for the entirety of the open source world.
Yes. Okay,
so the person discovered the attack at the end of March. How did it actually happen? How did we, like, there's code reviews in process. There's a bunch of stuff that's supposed to happen to prevent attacks from making it into distros that are backdoors like this, right?
You know, I can't say for sure did the process break down here. I'm like certainly not that knowledgeable or authoritative here, but I don't know if that's always the case. Like, I don't know that there is always actually somebody there reviewing everything perhaps as closely as it should be. This was, this vulnerability was slipped into essentially source code releases that were made specifically for these distros, not what is publicly available on the Git repository.
Yeah, that's correct.
But at the root, really, this just comes down to one person maintaining this critical piece of software who clearly, looking now at mailing lists from the past 2-3 years, like, was incredibly burned out and became a target of opportunity for whoever went out looking for a way to do something like this.
For me, the how did it happen wasn't somebody figured out a way to bypass the stuff. The way it happened was one person was responsible for this. An unpaid volunteer developer was responsible for a piece of critical code, which is the way it happens every time. The Heartbleed stuff was the same thing. It wasn't a social exploit like this. But like what happened was this malicious person, the user whose name is supposedly Giatan. That's their name on GitHub. That's their name in mailing lists and stuff like that. It's unclear that that's almost certainly not their real name. Over a period of like 2.5 years, built a relationship with the existing developer of this piece of software and started contributing in a way that literally no one else ever had in the history of this project.
Right. I think we should stress that there were no inherent flaws in any piece of software involved in this entire chain that made this possible. It was not existing bugs. It was not like security flaws or poor design or anything wrong with any software that was out there. It was this person infiltrating this project, gaining the trust that ultimately allowed them to make contributions to the project without any oversight. And then they slipped malicious code in there. So
that's exactly it.
Again, this was not taking advantage of like poor work or anything like that on the part of anyone involved here. It was entirely something they socially engineered their way into, not software engineered, I guess is the best way to put it.
Well, I mean, they were software engineering as well, because the way they distributed to the distros is fascinating.
Yeah, and a lot of the stuff is tremendously over my head, but a lot of security researchers out there I have seen refer to this as an incredibly clever attack. Like whoever perpetrated this extremely knew what they were doing on an engineering level. It's interesting when we talk about code reviews and how this was distributed and who they targeted, and et cetera, et cetera. Like there's a lot of conflicting views out there on, is open source inherently weak to this kind of thing? Is it because of the way open source works that this happened? Or is open source also uniquely positioned to respond to something like this in a way that closed source is not, I think
this is a situation where both of those things can be true, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not impossible for a malicious actor to go get a job at Microsoft, right? And get on the Windows kernel team and do bad things. It's probably easier for a malicious actor to sit and be paid to make good contributions to a project for two or 3 years, and then start slipping in the bad stuff once they've gained the trust and the appropriate permissions, right? Like,
yeah, it definitely seems to me it's the case that this was both easier to perpetrate and also easier to discover and defeat in the context of open source than it would have been in like a corporate setting, right? Like you said, it's going to be a lot harder to get hired at a major corporation probably as a bad actor, but then if you pull that off, the code is closed. Only people at the company can look at it and see that there's something wrong, and especially see what it is that's wrong, right? Whereas here, once people knew that this was a problem, the code is out there, and literally everybody who knows what they're doing can all look at it together and figure it out quite quickly.
Right. And so the interesting thing about this is that like you said, the GitHub repository doesn't actually have the malicious backdoor code. it was only distributed in the source tarballs that go up to the respective
distro maintainers, right?
Yeah, distro maintainers. And it was also like they did a bunch of clever things that made it look like it wasn't actually C code that would compile, so that it would bypass the automated checks for the kind of things that it was doing. And it worked shockingly well, right? Like they did this thing that shouldn't have been possible. The other interesting thing is, like, in one of the articles I read, I think it might have been in the big long fact that kind of breaks down the whole thing. The developer was like, I should have been able to find this because I run Gentoo and I was seeing problems reported from users on Debian and Red Hat that I wasn't able to replicate on my Gentoo test machine, presumably because the Gentoo test machine was pulling the source code directly from the Git repo and not from some upstream tarball. So they weren't affected by the problem, which is like a super interesting idea that maybe the Gentoo people all along were right. We should just all be compiling all of our stuff from source.
Sure.
And it does mean that theoretically, I mean, at this point, I think the consensus is that no code submitted by this person should probably be regarded as safe. And most of the distros, we'll talk about that in a minute, but the distros are taking action to expunge or validate everything.
Scorched earth action in some cases.
Yeah.
But I guess we should talk about, or finish talking about, kind of how this happened from a social standpoint. I mean, people have trawled the XC development mailing lists from the last 2 years very extensively at this point, and kind of unearthed very inconspicuous, smoking gun kind of threads, email threads, making it quite clear that Colin was very burned out and, struggling to maintain this important software by himself with no support or pay. And you see threads, and it's very difficult to tell if these are just legitimate encounters in the open source world versus a bunch of sock puppet accounts that were all collectively trying to make this happen, but threads where he's being pressured about how slowly he's maintaining and updating the software. Here comes this knight in shining armor who just happens to be very eager to contribute to the XC project. Here are some other accounts chiming in saying, you've got a prospective maintainer right here. What's taking you so long? Why not get the help you need? I mean, it's again, could absolutely be real people out there who just stumbled into poor behavior on their part that aided this attack, or it could have been an orchestrated attempt to push this through. It's hard to say.
There was a blog post by this guy named Rob Menching who goes through the whole thing, the whole series of threads. And yeah, when we were doing FOSSPOD research, I remember finding there were multiple episodes where we found threads that were okay. One of the common threads we talked about is there's a fair number of software packages that are really, really crucial to the functioning of the technological world at this point that are the XKCD example. They're maintained by one or two people or a really small number of people who are mostly unpaid or very lightly paid volunteers. And they have trillion-dollar companies, market cap companies that depend on their software that are hey, when the Microsoft engineer discovered this exploit, he posted a high priority message to the mailing list for it, right? For all of these things, where most of the people working there are developer volunteers. They're not people who are being paid. It's not their job. There's no pager duty or whatever for these folks. And it's the same thing with this, and it happens a lot where somebody who comes in and relies on this piece of open source software comes into the maintainer and it's like, hey man, I need you to put this bug fix in. It's been in for 3 weeks. What's taking you so long to get it integrated? And it's usually just I wanted to go to my kid's soccer game, or I was having a mental breakdown from the amount of pressure I'm under, or any number of other things. It's it's not sustainable in a lot of cases for these people. And it's one of the things that's good is it's another, one of the good things that will come of this is another example, like Heartbleed was a few years ago, of this really crucial piece of software that's being developed by a team that's too small and completely unfunded and not supported in any way, shape, or form by the distros or by the corporate users or by literally anyone. So yeah, this thread literally has a user come in and say, hey, is this version of this for Java still maintained? I asked a question here a week ago and haven't heard back. Right.
Yeah.
yeah, if and then the maintainer responds and says, yes, it's behind. I'm behind. It'll get fixed if somebody supports a bug. Just there's no new features right now because I'm too busy.
And then this one conspicuous account that a lot of people have looked at as like, okay, if there's any bad actor in this thread, it's probably this person. Progress will not happen until there is a new maintainer. Dennis, you're better off waiting until new maintainer happens or fork it yourself. Submitting patches here has no purpose these days. The current maintainer lost interest or doesn't care to maintain anymore. It is sad to see for a repo like this. And they pop up several more times with some pretty scathing language. You ignore the many patches bit rotting away on the mailing list. Right now, you choke your repo. Why wait until 5.4 to change maintainer? Why delay what your repo needs? Like, it's, again, could just be a shitty asshole pressuring somebody doing free work because they want something faster. Could have been part of this coordinated attack to push.
Brad, I'm sorry about your mental health issues, but it is important to be aware of your own limits. I get this is a hobby project for all contributors, but the community desires more.
Yeah.
Right.
Like
it's
hard to read this and not see some kind of like orchestrated ill intent in some of these messages. At any rate, whatever the nature of that pressure, it was successful. And this person who, like I said, had magically shown up with a lot of interest in contributing to this project, ultimately was made a co-maintainer of the project, which meant they had carte blanche to do literally whatever they wanted with it.
But at this, like literally at the same time, on this kind of project, if somebody comes in and starts making code submissions and helping somebody, that like the maintainer is going to say yes. The maintainer did nothing wrong here, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Right. Like somebody wants to help on an open source project. The whole point of the open source is that yeah, you accept help. And the fact that like this person was able to get in and do this is it's kind of a bug, also kind of a feature.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like, I mean, they actually, let's talk about what's next. Like, that's where we're at, right? What happens next?
Yeah.
GitHub almost immediately suspended both main contributors to the xz-utils, Colin Lassie and G10.
Colin was reinstated pretty quickly, obviously, because it was pretty clear that he didn't do anything wrong here. He was just made a victim, essentially.
If you're running the unstable rolling update versions of Linux, you should absolutely update your systems. Like that's important.
Yeah, like we said earlier, this malicious code got out there to everywhere. You know, like I said, it was on my MacBook. It's in Arch. It's in a bunch of places that have bleeding edge software. But again, it was only those specific contexts. Debian and Fedora-based distros with specific all these different pieces in place where it could actually be used.
Yeah.
But and the caveat constantly to that is, as far as we know, like this is what we know now. Yeah. But this person was so smart and so malicious that the running assumption is like there could be anything else out there that we don't know about. So it doesn't matter if you're on what we think are unaffected systems right now. You absolutely should update immediately.
Well. And the more paranoid security researchers that I follow are now looking at this as a potential other, like this method as a vector for other attacks on other parts of the software ecosystem.
Yeah.
In addition to what we've seen here with xz-utils.
Right. Yeah. This is what is I don't think I'd heard this term before. Like, this is what is being referred to as a supply chain attack, because it attacks something. Again, not the thing that ultimately is to be exploited, which in this case was SSHD, but something else that it depends on in specific cases, right?
Yeah.
So like that's kind of where the supply chain part comes in. You can imagine this chain of other software that you need in place to run things in a normal context also being exploited here.
But then the other thing to think about is if you're a nation state and you want access to something, it's not like your person who, your people who maintain these high value targets are like, they're not signing security clearances, and they're not getting checkups from the security agent. They're not working at CISA or the FBI or the NSA or whatever and secured. So if I'm a maintainer of this high profile thing and I have financial problems, and somebody comes to me and is like, hey, we'll take care of your credit card problem if you just put a little code in here for us. Like, it's a kind of nasty situation, as interdependent and interlocked as the open source world is.
Yeah. I mean, you find a lot of open source developers are very principled, and you would hope that the principles that bring people to this kind of work in the first place would be counter to some kind of self-serving action like that, but you never know. Like it's impossible to say.
Well, I was going to say one of the things that is happening as a result of this is that other software in the tool chain is being investigated to see how to prevent this type of attack in the future. Like OpenSSH is considering implementing libraryless versions of its functionality so that it doesn't rely on external software as much. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen a lot of those kind of policy changes and so forth that people are discussing, which is good, but also seem like very reactive sorts of responses to me, where it's like, hey, this particular vulnerability is here, and so we're going to try to close that avenue off. But there are assuredly there are countless other avenues for something like this that people aren't thinking about right now. It feels like the better approach to solving this is better support for the people who make this really important software on the part of, you tell me, on the part of corporations, on the part of governments, I don't know, on the part of the community. Like it seems like an unsustainable state of affairs to have such critical infrastructure be maintained by people who are putting a huge amount of work in and getting nothing out of it. Like that's just not sustainable forever. And it seems like this is just going to happen again if there isn't some kind of better support put in place.
I think that's a larger conversation, right? Like right now we're in the, hey, one horse got out of the barn, but there's still 24 horses left in the barn. Should we shut the door to the barn?
Right.
Or should we, put a fence around the barn? I don't, metaphor broke down there, but
sure.
The one of the conversations I saw that was really interesting out of this is that those distro specific tarballs are essentially unpeer reviewable because there's a massive amount of code to go over and it's more or less the same. And people are starting to look at ways that can be evaluated like systematically or I hesitate to say this. It might be a machine learning. This might be a machine learning problem. There's a whole bunch of really interesting conversations happening about that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I would love to hear from like working open source developers. It was a little bit over my head why exactly code is packaged up separately for these different Linux distros and distributed directly that way, as opposed to pulling directly from kind of the upstream. I mean, distros patch stuff all the time. Like we've talked about here, it's specifically because of the way Debian and Fedora do things with this chain of software that this was even possible.
It's because they have unique make files often, and they have unique, like you said, the patches that come in on a distro specific basis for individual libraries have to be integrated, and they set them up so that that's easy to do. Basically, is my understanding.
Yeah, if there's any more nuance to that, I would love to hear like on our Discord if people want to chime in.
Yeah, that'd be great.
There.
On the funding side, though, there was a good CISA post, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is a U.S. government agency tasked with finding this out. There's obviously a lot of law enforcement work going on this right now, but they had a blog post that explicitly says, it was bolded, this text. I'm going to read it exactly. It says, tech manufacturers who profit from open source software must do their part by being responsible consumers of and sustainable contributors to the open source packages they defend on. And then they said that explicitly means either putting money in, dedicating developers to things, or both.
Interesting. This blog post just went up the day before we're recording this. I hadn't seen this yet. That's good. Like things like that need to be said more often and more loudly, for sure.
Yeah, they in that blog post, it's worth reading. They had talked about having a tabletop exercise that basically mimicked that the week before this happened. That where they basically get together and war game out this whole scenario of, hey, a backdoor has been discovered. How do we deal with it? With a bunch of big contributors and open source distro maintainers and software developers and all this. That stuff's public, so you can go download it if you want, because it was built by the U.S. government. The FFmpeg blog that you linked that called out Microsoft for posting high priority security alerts to a unpaid volunteer developer mailing list feels icky. Yeah. They make a lot of money. For sure. I mean, yeah, this started on Twitter. I didn't actually see the blog version of this, but the FFmpeg Twitter account says the XZ fiasco has shown how a dependence on unpaid volunteers can cause major problems. Trillion-dollar corporations expect free and urgent support from volunteers. Like this message they posted from their mail from this bug that was filed from a Microsoft engineer. Hi, this is a high priority ticket, and the FFmpeg version this FFmpeg version is currently used in a highly visible product at Microsoft.
We have customers experiencing issues with captions during Teams live events. Please help.
Yeah.
Like, think about that. This is a $3 trillion company going out there and saying, hey, volunteers who make this free product that we use in a ton of our software, this is high priority. Please fix this immediately. Like, what? And then the FFmpeg account goes on. After politely requesting a support contract from Microsoft for long-term maintenance, they offered a one-time payment of a few $1,000s instead. This is unacceptable.
Oh.
The lesson from the XZ fiasco is that investments in maintenance and sustainability are unsexy and probably won't get a middle manager their promotion, but pay off 1,000-fold over many years. But try selling that to a bean counter. Whoever runs this account has strong opinions on this matter.
I mean, if I made FFmpeg, I'd probably have some real strong feelings about it too, given all the places it shows up.
It's insane. I mean, it's like maybe not the most common software, but it's up there, especially in the user-facing context.
It's like there's in terms of stuff people see. Every TV in the world.
FFmpeg is probably used in damn near every device that handles audio and video in some fashion, or their library versions like libav codec.
Yeah.
But it's weird because in some cases this does happen. Like, for example, last I checked, Intel is the biggest contributor to the Linux kernel. Netflix is a massive contributor to FreeBSD.
Twitch and I think Google contribute to OBS.
Right. Yes. Like AV1 came out of a consortium of corporations. Like, there are a lot of cases where big companies do pump tons of money into and development efforts into open source stuff, but it's not global. And kind of like that, the FFmpeg account said, like in a lot of cases like this, it's not sexy to devote money to maintaining a compression library. You know, it seems like they target things where they are going to very tangibly benefit in the short term.
But I mean, so it's good that like YouTube and Logitech and Twitch and Facebook and Nvidia and AMD and Intel sponsor OBS, right? But OBS also has a boatload of downstream contributors in other open source projects like FFmpeg and all that. And like, if you don't support the whole chain, it's not going to it just doesn't work.
Yeah, like this example should make it abundantly clear that everything has to be covered or nothing is ultimately.
Yeah. So let's see there. I'm sure law enforcement people are doing this. Somebody did a time zone analysis of all the commits that the bad actor did.
Yeah, it's been funny watching people try to sleuth that out or not. You know, some people are like, it's pointless to waste our time like trying to dissect what time commits were made or what this person's username is. Like, other people will figure that out. But then, like you said, a lot of other people have been saying like, well, the majority of the commits were made from like 9 to 5 in this particular time zone in Eastern Europe or in China, or the commits seem to miss these specific holidays in this specific country. You know, a lot of like, what nation state was this person working for?
Hardcore internet detective work is what I would call it.
Yeah.
With all the good and bad that implies.
Right. Sometimes that yields results. A lot of times it does a lot of damage. But the one thing that I feel like just about everybody agrees on here is that it was almost certainly somebody affiliated with a nation state. Because of the level of sophistication and time and dedication involved here, that it seems almost inconceivable that this could have been anything else other than somebody who was supported by a large amount of resources.
I don't know that. I mean, I don't know enough about this to have an expert opinion. I think that it's pretty easy to compromise people, whether they're working on the behalf of a nation state from the beginning, or they started working for a nation state after they had some sort of problem that got them in trouble, that made them easy to compromise. Like, there's a reason that if you have too high a debt to income ratio, or if you have a longstanding drug use problem, you can't get a security clearance, right? And it's like, we're in the same space here. Anyway,
sure.
But yeah, 2 years to build this relationship seems like a lot for somebody who's not getting paid by someone,
for sure.
Especially given the time that they did mostly get commits happen within a working day type schedule. It is worth mentioning that the commit times can be changed on GitHub. There's a whole host of reasons that is weird and difficult to do. Mostly around the conversations around the commits coming onto message boards and stuff like that, and those times not matching up.
Right.
But yeah,
it was kind of weird to see a good number of people out there going like, oh, look, the malicious actor has a Chinese name. Like, look at that. And I'm like, that seems like more evidence to me that this person was not affiliated with China. Like that's the easiest thing to fake.
If you're a Russian hacker, a malicious hacker doing bad things to people, you don't make your username Russia #1.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
It's unfortunate. This keeps happening. It's whether it's vulnerability or a backdoor. We've seen this happen again and again, and we've said it 4 times, I think, already in this episode. But it's true. It's either Atlas holding up the world or the XKCD Image Magic comic, where it's the one dependency on which the entire internet rests.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like this is the open source developers version of going viral, which seems horrible for everyone involved.
Yes.
So I hope that the person who maintains xz-utils, Colin Lask, recovers from this and it doesn't make their life worse.
They seem to be taking it somewhat hard, which, I mean, how could you not when this first broke, which really makes you feel for them. But, all we can hope for is that this leads to change in institutional infrastructural change in how a lot of this stuff is supported and propped up and kept going, because like everybody depends on this. Like literally the entire world depends on the sanctity of this stuff at this point. And surely this time things will be different.
Well, let me tell you a little story about Lucy and Charlie Brown and the football.
Oh boy.
No, it's
I don't know. I mean, in the time that I have been following this, I have never seen this community react to something like this, not even close.
This feels it feels a lot like Heartbleed, honestly.
This feels like a watershed moment where people are like, oh my God, we have got to fix some things or we're all going to be in a lot of trouble.
I think each time it happens and the people who are smart and tell the people that make decisions and have money that this is going to happen, and it keeps happening again and again, it means at some point, like I personally, I am fine with my tax dollars going to fund, technological infrastructure like this, right?
Totally.
Like this is a thing. If the people who maintain this kind of software and stuff like curl or wget or FFmpeg or the things that are the foundational pieces of the technological stack that make a massive portion of the economy work, if they can't make money making those things and those things are necessary, we should be funding them. There's no reason not to. It doesn't cost very much compared to the financial impact of something like this going wide and being installed on every computer in the United States. Yeah, no, there's no reason not to give this person $50,000 a year to keep doing the thing that they're doing, so they don't have to sweat it all the time.
Or even a healthy living for like 2, 3, 5 people.
Yeah,
is absolutely nothing in large budgetary contexts, right? Yeah. It's absolutely nothing for the payoff. I mean, that's what FFmpeg said, right? Like the payoff is beyond reckoning for the investment, but somebody's got to make the investment first. Anyway, that's probably about it. I do want to mention just the response to this. Everybody's purging it in their own ways. Like you said, like the underlying libraries and software are putting up extra guardrails to prevent things like this happening again. And the distros are all taking care of it. I did think it was funny. I run Debian on my server at home. So I followed the Debian bug mailing list as this was all happening. They initially rolled back to the version before like this final piece of all the malicious code was put in, but then very quickly said, like, how can we trust any commit this person ever made? And pretty quickly decided like, hey, let's just roll back to before this person ever had any kind of commit access whatsoever. Like what is the value of keeping any of their contributions against the potential harm that there is more lurking in here we don't know about?
Yeah.
So that's what's happening there. But I did read Lassa Collins' page. Like, I don't know how recently this got updated. They are pretty quickly working toward a new clean version, what they consider a fully clean version, which they say is going to be 5.8.0.
Yeah.
And once that's out, they say this, at least in this particular case, this danger hopefully will have passed because they will have audited everything at that point.
We talked about this with Jeremy Allison on the FOSS-Pod last year or year before last, I guess now. Jeremy was the maintainer for Samba for a long time. And he described it as the plumbing of the computer world. Like, right. Yep. You're making the sewer and the water lines, and it's stuff that everybody relies on and nobody really thinks about except for when it breaks. And that's where we're at. It's broken, and somebody's got to put it back together. So thanks to the people who do that work.
Mm-hmm.
And on that note, I think that'll do it for us this week.
Yeah.
Brad, as always, you know this, the listeners may not. Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod is a listener supported show. That means we would not be here without your generous support. For $5, you get access to the fabulous Tech Pod Discord, which is full of beautiful nerds who talk about stuff like it turns out it was a useful resource. Learning about this backdoor. Talked to several members about to ask some questions that clarified things and all that as we were putting the notes together for this. Any errors in the show are ours and not theirs, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But you can go to patreon.com/techpod. And like I said, for $5 a month, you get access to the Discord, you get our patron exclusive episodes, and you get to be a part of the TechPod community, which is growing and awesome every day.
Yeah. Great resource. I have to say the Links channel has never been as active as it was in the days after this broke. Like it was fun to watch
off.
People who work in this world kind of stunned by everything that was happening.
And as always, we want to thank everybody who supports the show, but we want to give a very special thanks to our executive producer tier patrons, including Paddle Creek Games, makers of Fractured Veil, Andrew Slosky, Jordan Lippett, Bunny Crimes, Just Wedge, Joel Krauska, Twinkle Twinkie, David Allen, James Kamek, and Pantheon, makers of the HS3 high-speed 3D printer. Thank you all so much for listening. We will be back next week with another episode of the Tech Pod. And just remember, I think not next week, but maybe the week after. Is that what we're thinking now? Pirates of Silicon Valley?
Let's say it could be any time.
Could be any time. It's on archive.org.
Yes,
everybody can watch it around the world.
Yes, I'll link it in the show notes yet again this week. It could be a break glass, and we're going to do it next week, depending on I'm traveling again this week, so it could be we need to
seeing how that goes. Okay,
but it could be the week after. Yes, make sure to watch that.
So watch Pirates of Silicon Valley. Look, it has the guy from ER playing Steve Jobs. You can't beat that.
No.
We'll be back next week with another Tech Pod. Thanks for listening. See you all then. Bye.